What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Wrestling Decoded, and today we're talking about a physical object that has been held by more generationally important wrestlers than almost any other championship in the history of the business, across more promotions, more eras, and more genuine title changes than most fans fully appreciate. The big gold belt, the championship design first introduced in 1986 for the NWA and WCW World Heavyweight Championship, has been defended in Jim Crockett Promotions, WCW, the NWO, and eventually WWE itself, across a 30-year stretch that connects Ric Flair's defining career moments to Batista, to Edge, to Seth Rollins, to Roman Reigns. So today we're tracing the full legacy of this specific title from its origin all the way through to what it became, and making the case for why it genuinely deserves to be considered the most historically significant championship design in wrestling history. Let's get into it. If you're into these deep dives into wrestling history that most people don't know in full detail, that's exactly what this channel does. Go ahead and subscribe before we start. The origin of the big gold belt is itself a story worth starting with properly, because understanding why the belt was designed the way it was designed tells you something important about what the NWA was trying to communicate about its own championship in 1986. The title's predecessor, the NWA World Heavyweight Championship belt, had a different design that carried its own prestige through decades of Jim Londo's, Lou Thez, Harley Race, and the early Ric Flair years. When Jim Crockett Promotions commissioned a new title design in 1986, the brief was essentially about visual ambition, a belt that looked like the most important championship in professional wrestling, full stop, without qualification. The result was a significantly larger, more ornate design than most championships of its era, with prominent globe imagery and a level of physical presence that read immediately as something different from the standard championship belt aesthetic. Ric Flair was the first person to carry the new design publicly, and the combination of Flair's character and the belt's visual weight became genuinely inseparable throughout the late 1980s. Flair's entire presentation, the robes, the theatrical entrance, the verbal emphasis on the championship as the ultimate prize, found its perfect physical complement in a belt that looked exactly as expensive and important as he was claiming the championship was. The big gold belt didn't just represent the NWA title in this era. It was a physical argument for why the NWA title was more important than WWE's championship, at a time when that argument genuinely needed to be made in the marketplace. Here's a question worth sitting with. How much of a championship's perceived prestige is actually about the title lineage and the wrestlers who've held it? And how much is about the physical object itself communicating importance before a single word of commentary has been spoken? The first genuinely complicated chapter in the big gold belt's lineage involves Ric Flair's departure from WCW in 1991 and his arrival in WWE, and specifically the fact that Flair brought the physical belt with him rather than returning it to WCW when he left. This wasn't a small detail. WCW considered the belt company property and was furious about its absence. Flair appeared on WWE television carrying the big gold belt, referring to himself as the real world champion, in segments that genuinely blurred the line between kayfabe and reality in a way that felt unusually sharp even by wrestling standards. The real-world dispute between Flair and WCW over the physical championship became part of the on-screen WWE storyline, a piece of actual business conflict being used as wrestling content before anyone had a formal term for that kind of crossover. WCW eventually got the belt back and Flair eventually returned to the promotion, but the incident established something important about the big gold belt's cultural status. It was recognizable enough and associated strongly enough with a specific idea of what a world championship was supposed to look and feel like, that its physical presence on rival television actually meant something to the audience watching. The WCW years of the big gold belt's history produced some of the most significant championship reigns in the promotion's existence. Sting's long-awaited WCW World Heavyweight Championship victory at Starrcade 1997, at the end of an entire year of refusing to compete while watching the NWO take over the company, is one of the most emotionally satisfying championship wins wrestling has produced. The visual of Sting finally holding the big gold belt after months of patient, silent build is the kind of image that a different-looking championship simply wouldn't have generated with the same weight. The belt's visual familiarity, its established status as a physical symbol of a specific kind of championship, was doing narrative work in that moment, independent of anything said or written in the surrounding story. Goldberg's undefeated streak culminating in a WCW championship win in 1998 used the big gold belt as the ultimate validation of a push built entirely on dominance rather than character complexity, and it worked, partly because the belt itself communicated legitimate importance in a way that made even a relatively simple narrative feel sufficiently significant. The NWO's various members cycling through the title across this same period produced one of the stranger stretches in the belt's history, its visual prestige being used as a prop in a storyline specifically designed around the idea of outsiders disrespecting established wrestling tradition. Quick pause here. Drop a comment on which big gold belt reign you think is the most historically significant, because I think there's a genuine argument for Sting's Starrcade win, Flair's defining late 1980s runs, and Goldberg's first championship as three completely different types of important. When WWE purchased WCW in 2001, the big gold belt came with it, and what WWE chose to do with the title design in the years following is genuinely interesting from a creative and business perspective. Rather than retiring the design as a WCW relic, WWE eventually activated the big gold belt as the World Heavyweight Championship for the newly created Raw brand in 2002, placing it on Triple H as the inaugural champion in a decision that simultaneously validated the belt's prestige and introduced it to an audience that had primarily associated it with WCW. The decision to use an actual WCW championship design as a flagship title on WWE's flagship program was a quiet but significant acknowledgement that the big gold belt's visual prestige transcended its original promotional context. The subsequent WWE World Heavyweight Championship reigns produced by this decision constitute one of the most impressive title lineage stretches in modern wrestling history. Batista's championship reigns, particularly his first against Triple H in 2005, used the belt's visual authority to anchor a character whose in-ring storytelling benefited enormously from the physical legitimacy the championship communicated. Edge's multiple World Heavyweight Championship reigns across 2007 through 2011 represent some of the most creatively interesting title programs the belt has anchored, his character's theatrical villainy finding a perfect foil in a championship that looked almost classically legitimate, the contrast between Edge's heelish pursuit of the title and the belt's visual gravitas generating a specific tension that a more cartoonishly designed championship couldn't have produced. The final chapter of the big gold belt's active competition history connects directly to WWE's current championship landscape in ways that make the title's retirement feel both understandable from a structural perspective and genuinely melancholy from a historical one. The belt was last used as the primary design for a major WWE championship across the Seth Rollins Universal Championship era before eventually being replaced by more recent designs as WWE consolidated and restructured its title picture. The physical belt itself remains in WWE's possession, occasionally referenced in historical content, its image appearing in montages celebrating the history of the world title lineage it anchored for over 30 years. What the big gold belt's full history actually represents, traced from Jim Crockett Promotions in 1986 all the way through its WWE years, is something genuinely unusual in wrestling, a physical object that maintained legitimate prestige across multiple company transitions, multiple creative regimes, and multiple completely different business contexts, partly through the quality of the performers who carried it, and partly through the specific visual authority the design itself communicated. Most championship belts are effectively blank canvases, their prestige entirely a function of the stories told around them. The big gold belt was always something slightly different, a design with enough immediate visual weight that it contributed to those stories rather than simply serving as their backdrop. That's a specific quality almost no other championship in wrestling history has managed to maintain across 30 years in two major promotional transitions, and it's why the conversation about wrestling's most prestigious championship legacy almost always returns eventually to the same physical object. Which big gold belt reign do you think did the most to establish the title's legacy? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want more of these deep dives into wrestling history that most people don't know in full detail, make sure you're subscribed to Wrestling Decoded. There's plenty more of this still to uncover.